The morning sun cast long shadows across the waters of Tawi anchorage on June 13, 1944, as the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy prepared for what would become one of the most decisive naval engagements of the Pacific War. Among the warships assembled in this remote corner of the southwestern Philippines, the aircraft carrier Shokaku stood as a testament to Japanese naval engineering and ambition. Her flight deck, stretching nearly 850 ft, had launched the aircraft that attacked Pearl Harbor 30 months earlier. Now she was about to embark on her final voyage, though neither her crew of 1,763 men nor their commanding officers could have foreseen the submarine that would seal her fate. Just 6 days later, Vice Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa watched from the bridge of his flagship as the combined elements of the first mobile fleet began their departure sequence. The formation was impressive by any standard. 3 fleet carriers, including Shokaku and her sister ships Zuikaku and Taiho, accompanied by an array of supporting vessels. The heavy cruisers Atargo, Takao, Maya, and Chokai took their screening positions, while 13 destroyers formed a protective ring around the capital ships. This represented the last great concentration of Japanese carrier power in the Pacific, a force that had once dominated the ocean from Hawaii to the Indian Ocean. The fleet's departure from Tawi was not merely another sortie. It represented Japan's desperate gamble to reverse the tide of war that had turned decisively against them since Midway. As the anchor chains rattled up through the horse holes and the great vessels began to move, thousands of sailors stood at their posts, unaware that within a week over 1,200 of them would perish in the warm waters of the Philippine Sea. The destination was the Marana Islands, where American forces had begun their assault on Saipan. The mission was nothing less than the destruction of the U.S. Pacific Fleet Carrier Force. The strategic situation facing Japan in mid-1944 was catastrophic. The empire that had expanded so rapidly in 1941 and early 1942 was now contracting under relentless American pressure. The loss of the Gilbert Islands, the neutralization of True, and now the American invasion of the Marianas represented more than territorial losses. They signaled the approaching endgame of the Pacific War. Saipan in particular held special significance. Its capture would place American B-29 Superfortress bombers within range of Tokyo itself, bringing the war directly to the Japanese homeland for the first time since the Diddle Raid. Admiral Tsutoyota, Commander-in-Chief of the combined fleet, understood the gravity of the situation perfectly. The loss of the Maranas would sever Japan's communications with its resource-rich southern territories and expose the home islands to devastating strategic bombing. In response, he authorized Operation Ego, a complex plan that sought to leverage Japan's remaining advantages. The longer range of its carrier aircraft, land-based aviation support from island airfields, and the superior training of its battleship gunners in night combat. The plan called for the mobile fleet to engage the American carriers in a decisive battle, while they were committed to supporting the amphibious operations at Saipan. Yet the Japanese Navy of 1944 bore little resemblance to the force that had stunned the world at Pearl Harbor. The attrition of experienced pilots was perhaps the most critical weakness. The veterans who had executed the precision attacks at Pearl Harbor, Darwin, and Colombo were mostly dead, victims of the grinding battles at Midway, the Solomons, and the Santa Cruz Islands. Their replacements, rushed through abbreviated training programs, possessed neither the skill nor the experience of their predecessors. Many of the pilots aboard Shokaku and her sister carriers had fewer than 200 flying hours compared to the 800-plus hours of their American counterparts. The fuel situation presented another critical vulnerability. Japan's merchant marine, systematically hunted by American submarines, could no longer reliably transport refined fuel from the East Indies to the home islands. The mobile fleet was forced to operate on unrefined Tarakan crude oil, pumped directly from Borneo's wells into the ship's bunkers. This heavy sulfurous petroleum produced thick black smoke, clogged boilers, and reduced the fleet's maximum speed. Engine room crews worked in hellish conditions as the crude oil released toxic fumes that made extended operations below decks nearly unbearable. Despite these handicaps, Ozawa's fleet remained formidable on paper. The Japanese had assembled 9 aircraft carriers carrying approximately 440 aircraft supported by 5 battleships, including the mighty Yamato and Musashi, 13 cruisers, and 28 destroyers. This force would face Admiral Raymond Spruant's Fifth Fleet, which boasted 15 carriers with 956 aircraft, 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, and 69 destroyers. The Americans held decisive advantages in numbers, pilot quality, radar technology, and logistics, but Ozawa hoped that careful tactics and the element of surprise might offset these disadvantages. The strategic chess match between Ozawa and Spruant began even before the fleets departed their respective anchorages. Japanese naval intelligence had correctly identified the Maranas as the next American target, allowing Ozawa to preposition his forces for a counterstrike. The admiral's plan was elegant in its conception. He would keep his carriers beyond the range of American aircraft, while using his own longer-ranged planes to strike the U.S. fleet. Japanese carrier aircraft, stripped of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks to save weight, could attack from 300 meters away, while American planes had an effective combat radius of only 200 meter. Ozawa also counted on support from over 500 land-based aircraft stationed at airfields on Guam, Roa, Tinian, and Yap. These planes would execute preliminary attacks on the American fleet, weakening it before the carrier engagement. The combined assault of land and carrier-based aviation would in theory overwhelm the American defenses and create opportunities for decisive strikes. The Japanese admiral positioned his fleet in 3 groups: Fan Force under Vice Admiral Tako Kurita with the light carriers, Force A with Ozawa himself aboard Taihaho, along with Shokaku and Zuikaku, and Force B under Rear Admiral Takagi Jashima with the remaining carriers. Admiral Spruant, commanding the American forces, faced a complex tactical problem. His primary mission was to protect the amphibious forces at Saipan, but he also needed to engage and destroy the Japanese fleet if the opportunity arose. Intelligence reports from coast watchers and signals intercepts indicated that a major Japanese naval force was approaching, but its exact composition and intentions remained unclear. Spruant positioned his Task Force 58, divided into 4 carrier groups to the west of the Maranas, creating a barrier between the Japanese and the invasion beaches. The submarine force under Admiral Charles Lockwood played a crucial but often overlooked role in this strategic positioning. Lockwood had studied Japanese naval patterns and correctly anticipated that any relief force would pass through the Philippine Sea. He positioned his submarines in a scouting line, creating what he called the NA line, a series of patrol zones that would serve as an early warning system. 4 submarines, Albor, Bang, Finback, and Stingray, were positioned at precise coordinates, forming a net through which the Japanese fleet would likely pass. What Lockwood didn't anticipate was that another submarine, not originally part of his carefully planned deployment, would achieve one of the most significant victories of the submarine war. USS Cavalla on her maiden war patrol was about to intersect with destiny. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Herman Kossler, had received orders to patrol east of the Philippines, but changing circumstances would soon place his boat directly in the path of Ozawa's advancing fleet. The USS Cavalla SS-244 represented the pinnacle of American submarine design in 1944. Built at the Electric Boat Company's shipyard in Groton, Connecticut, she was a Gateau-class fleet submarine, one of 77 boats of her class that would serve as the backbone of the U.S. submarine force throughout the war. Laid down on March 4, 1943, and launched on November 14th of the same year, Cavalla was commissioned on February 29, 1944, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Herman Kossler, a 36-year-old career naval officer from Ohio who had graduated from the Naval Academy in Ayutthaya. At 311 ft, 9 in length and displacing 1,826 tons on the surface, Cavalla was a formidable weapon of war. Her pressure hull, constructed of high-tensile steel, could withstand depths of up to 400 ft, though her test depth was listed at 300 ft powered by 4 Fairbanks Morse diesel engines generating 5,400 horsepower on the surface and 4 General Electric motors producing 2,040 horsepower when submerged. She could achieve speeds of 20.25 knots surfaced and 8.75 knots submerged. Her range was equally impressive, 11,000 nautical miles on the surface at 10 knots, though this was reduced to 48 hours at 2 knots when operating on battery power underwater. The submarine's primary armament consisted of 10 21-in torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, with storage for 241 or Mark 18 torpedoes. Each Mark 114 torpedo was 20 ft 6 in long, weighed 3,280 lb, and carried a 693 WW2 Torpex warhead capable of breaking the back of all but the most heavily armored warships. The troubled history of the Mark 114 with its defective magnetic exploder and tendency to run deeper than set had largely been resolved by 1944, making Cavalla's torpedoes far more reliable than those used earlier in the war. Secondary armament included a 5.25 caliber deck gun with 200 rounds and 250 caliber machine guns for anti-aircraft defense. Cavalla's crew of 72 officers and enlisted men had spent 3 months in intensive training before departing on their first war patrol. The submarine community was unique within the Navy. Officers and enlisted men lived and worked in extraordinarily close quarters, creating a level of interdependence unknown in the surface fleet. Every man from Kossler down to the most junior seaman had to qualify on every system aboard the boat. Lives depended on each crew member being able to perform any critical function in an emergency, whether operating the diving planes, managing the trim tanks, or firing torpedoes. The boat's technology represented the cutting edge of submarine warfare. Her SJ surface search radar could detect enemy vessels at ranges up to 12 mm in good conditions, while the SD air search radar provided warning of approaching aircraft. The ST periscope radar, though temperamental, allowed for precise range finding during attack approaches. Below the waterline, JK sound gear enabled the submarine to track targets acoustically, though the system was primitive compared to what would emerge later in the war. The Torpedo Data Computer (TDC), an electromechanical analog computer, calculated firing solutions by integrating target bearing, range, speed, and course with the submarine's own movement. Cavalla's journey to her appointment with history began on June 4, 1944, when she departed Midway Island for her maiden war patrol. The boat had arrived at Pearl Harbor in mid-May after a 5,000 mi journey from Connecticut via the Panama Canal, then proceeded to Midway for final preparations. During the brief stay at Midway, Kossler and his officers received their final briefings, loaded fresh provisions and ammunition, and made last-minute repairs and adjustments. The crew took what they knew might be their last liberty in civilization, though Midway offered far fewer amenities than Pearl Harbor. The submarine's assigned patrol area encompassed the waters east of the Philippines, specifically the approaches to San Bernardino Strait and Surya Strait, the two primary passages through the Philippine archipelago. These strategic waterways served as highways for Japanese naval and merchant traffic, moving between the home islands and the resource-rich territories of the Netherlands East Indies. Kossler's orders were to interdict enemy shipping, gather intelligence on Japanese naval movements, and serve as a scout for the larger American operations unfolding to the east. The first days of the patrol proved uneventful, as Cavalla moved westward across the vast expanse of the Pacific. The crew settled into the monotonous routine of submarine operations. 4 hours on watch, 8 hours off, with the off-duty time split between sleeping, eating, and maintaining the boat's complex machinery. The submarine ran on the surface at night, her diesels charging the massive battery banks while making good speed toward the patrol area. During daylight hours, she often submerged to avoid detection by enemy aircraft, creeping along at 3 knots to conserve battery power. On June 8th, while transiting the waters near Marcus Island, approximately 200 miles southeast of Tokyo, Cavalla experienced her first unusual incident of the patrol. The officer of the deck reported a sudden jolt and vibration from the stern, followed by what appeared to be a pool of blood in the boat's wake. Kossler ordered all stop and sent men to inspect the propellers and stern planes. Finding no damage, he concluded that they had struck a small whale, one of many that inhabited these waters. The incident, while minor, served as a reminder of the ocean's many hazards beyond enemy action. The weather began deteriorating on June 14th as Cavalla approached her assigned patrol area. Barometric pressure dropped steadily and seas built to 15 ft, sending solid water over the bridge and down the conning tower hatch. The boat pitched and rolled violently, making normal operations nearly impossible. Men were thrown from their bunks, dishes crashed in the galley, and several crew members suffered severe seasickness. Kossler attempted to transmit a weather report to Pearl Harbor, valuable information for the fleet meteorologists planning air operations, but the storm's intensity prevented successful transmission. After fighting the typhoon for 18 hours, he ordered the boat submerged to ride out the storm in the relative calm below the surface. As the storm passed on June 15th, Cavalla surfaced to find clearing skies and moderating seas. Almost immediately, the radio operator intercepted a contact report from USS Flying Fish, another submarine operating nearby. Flying Fish had spotted a Japanese task force moving east at high speed, but had been unable to gain an attack position. The sighting electrified Cavalla's crew. Major Japanese fleet units had been scarce since the battles of 1942, and the opportunity to engage capital ships was exactly what every submarine commander dreamed of. Kossler immediately ordered a course change to intercept the reported contact and increase speed to 17 knots, pushing the diesels hard, despite the still rough seas. He made contact with USS Pipefish, also responding to Flying Fish's report, and the two submarines agreed to conduct a coordinated search. They would separate by 20 miners and sweep along the enemy's projected track, doubling their chances of making contact. Throughout the night of June 15th to 16th, lookouts strained their eyes searching for the distinctive silhouettes of Japanese warships, while the radar operator continuously swept the SJ scope for electronic contacts. Dawn on June 16th brought disappointment. Despite covering over 200 miles during the night search, neither submarine had found the Japanese task force. Kossler reluctantly concluded that the enemy had either changed course or increased speed beyond his calculations. He ordered Cavalla back to her assigned patrol area, but the brief taste of potential action had energized the crew. Every man aboard now knew that major Japanese fleet units were operating in their vicinity, and the chance for a significant engagement had increased dramatically. Just before midnight on June 16th, the SJ radar detected multiple contacts to the southwest. The operator reported what appeared to be 5 or 6 vessels moving at moderate speed. Kossler rushed to the conning tower and studied the radar display. The formation looked like a convoy. 2 large contacts that could be tankers or cargo ships escorted by 3 or 4 smaller vessels, probably destroyers or escort vessels. This was exactly the type of target submarines were expected to engage, and Kossler ordered battle stations as Cavalla began her approach. The attack approach proved frustrating. The Japanese escorts were alert and aggressive, constantly pinging with active sonar and making random course changes. Every time Cavalla maneuvered into a favorable position, a destroyer would suddenly turn toward them, forcing Kossler to go deep and evade. After 3 hours of cat-and-mouse maneuvering, during which the submarine never got closer than 4,000 yards to the main targets, a destroyer charged directly at Cavalla's position. Kossler ordered an emergency dive to 300 FT, rigged for silent running, and waited as the escort passed overhead, the sound of its screws clearly audible through the hull. When Cavalla finally surfaced at 0200 on June 17th, the convoy had vanished into the darkness. Kossler was frustrated but philosophical. Such was the nature of submarine warfare. What he didn't know was that the convoy he had been pursuing consisted of fleet oilers supporting Ozawa's mobile fleet. Had he successfully attacked these vessels, the Japanese carriers would have been forced to curtail their operations due to fuel shortage. Sometimes in war, the attacks that fail have as much historical significance as those that succeed. The afternoon of June 17th brought new orders from ComSubPac. Based on multiple submarine sightings and signal intelligence, Admiral Lockwood was repositioning his boats to intercept what was clearly a major Japanese fleet movement. Cavalla was ordered to take position at 1300 north, 13700 east, approximately 350 miramars west of Guam. Kossler plotted the new position and ordered a course change, pushing the boat hard to reach the assigned coordinates before the expected Japanese arrival. At 1945 hours on June 17th, as Cavalla raced toward her new position, the SJ radar operator reported a faint contact bearing 290-degree range 30,000 wandide. The contact was intermittent, appearing and disappearing with each radar sweep, suggesting it was at the extreme range of the equipment. Clear ordered a course change to close the contact and increase speed to maximum. As the range decreased, more contacts appeared on the radar screen. First 2, then 4, then 7 distinct returns. By 2015 hours, Costa had identified what could only be a major Japanese task force. The radar returns indicated at least 7 large vessels moving at 19 knots on a base course of 045 degree iron. The formation was zigzagging, a standard anti-submarine tactic, but the base course suggested they were heading toward the Marianas. Through careful plotting, Kossler identified what appeared to be at least one aircraft carrier, several possible battleships or heavy cruisers, and screening destroyers. This was no merchant convoy. Cavalla had stumbled upon a major element of the Japanese fleet. The decision Kossler faced was one of the most difficult in submarine warfare. His boat was in perfect position to attack with the Japanese force approaching his position. A spread of torpedoes fired at the right moment could damage or sink a capital ship. But Kossler also understood the strategic importance of his discovery. Admiral Spruant's fleet needed to know the location, composition, and course of this Japanese force. The information was potentially more valuable